the way in which we do things says so much about who we are. It comes down to the power of your will. How do you make great photographs? Because you're determined that you will. How do you write a beautiful piece of music? Because you will. And because you worked at it. You've worked at it and worked at it and worked at it, and you've put in the work. The fruit of all that labor is the ability to then get up and just do it.
You got a seat at my table. You got a here's somebody who believes you. Let truth remind you. You've always got a place to go to. You got a home.
Welcome to The Creator's Journey. I'm your host, Charles Gupton. In each show, I'll talk with creative leaders who face the same fears and obstacles we all face. What makes these folks effective are the processes they've developed that allow them to push through the darkness to consistently ship their work and make a difference. If you've ever felt that your fears and insecurities are getting the best of you, just know that you're not alone. Every creator who works from the heart faces the same challenges. I would love for you to join our community at thecreatorsjourney.com for ideas and inspiration that will bring light and direction to your journey.
Here's the key to my front door. You got a pillow if you lost yours. You got a seat at my table. You got a home. Here's somebody who believes you. Let truth remind you. You've always got a place to go to. You got a home.
Peter Coughter has worked in the advertising and communications fields for a lot of years, including his role as a principal in the agency Siddell, Mattis & Coughter for 20 years. Peter also worked as a TV director prior to that. In 1995, Peter left the agency he helped found and started his current enterprise, Coughter & Company, to help ad agencies and other companies learn how to more effectively present their ideas and business communication solutions to their clients. Peter's clients include most of the most influential advertising agencies in the U.S. and abroad. Education and development of up-and-coming talent is of great importance to Peter. To that end, he's been a professor at the Virginia Commonwealth University Ad Center in Richmond, Virginia since 1997, with an apparent mission to help students as well as professional creatives understand that they need to invest a portion of the time they spend in creating great work into learning how to present it in a way that ensures it actually gets used. I first learned about Peter's work while I was filming a conversation with a creative director for The Creator's Journey. He was raving about Peter's book, The Art of the Pitch, Persuasion and Presentation Skills That Win Business. I immediately bought and consumed it and have been looking forward to the opportunity to have a conversation around it for this show. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you, Charles. And I think I should point out that the school, when I started at VCU, it was called the Ad Center. But about 10 years ago, the name was changed officially to the VCU Brand Center.
It's good to have the right name there.
Not a big deal.
For many people, time spent playing sports leaves them with at least one lasting life lesson. I understand that you earned a scholarship to play basketball at Providence College.
Yeah.
Are there any lessons from that formative time of your life that have stayed with you?
Wow, I wasn't expecting that. So, all right. I think that I was privileged to be in the presence of greatness on a fairly regular basis because we had a couple of guys who went on to play in the NBA. We had one guy who was the leading scorer in the country his senior year, my junior year, and first player taken in the NBA draft. And so maybe now that you've made me think about this, I have learned something. He was his name was Jimmy Walker. Unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago. If there's basketball fans in our audience, they may not remember him, but they certainly remember his son, Jalen Rose.
Wow.
Which is a little known fact, as a matter of fact. But at any rate, I think the thing that I learned from Jimmy, was that he was relentless. He worked. And even though he had, I guess kind of like Michael Jordan, he predated Michael, of course, but Like Michael, he had more talent than everybody else in the room, but he also worked harder than anybody in the room. And I think maybe that's the big lesson I did take away from that.
Yeah, that's not a small lesson because there are a lot of people out there that have tremendous talent and they rely on their talent rather than a good work ethic. And a lot of people seem to surpass talent by just sheer persistence and hard work.
Yep.
Most people think of presentations only as something that you prepare for and give in front of an assembled group of people. But you appear to see that the way we present our ideas from a broader perspective includes everything we do. You want to start by digging into that a little bit?
Yeah, I can. I think that, everything you said is true, but I would also go so far as to say that most people seem to think that a presentation is a PowerPoint slide show that they read to some assembled audience. And people, I mean, the words have essentially become synonymous. Slides and presentation, they essentially mean the same to people. And, of course, nothing could be further from the truth. And as you say, I do believe that essentially everything is a presentation. Everything. I mean, if you're in the hallway and you bump into your boss and you're talking with them, whoever your boss may be, you're making a presentation to her. However casual it may seem to you, it's actually a presentation because you're being evaluated. I think a lot of young people are terrified. I mean, I've gotten to the point where I call it the J word. Judgment is just a terrifying thing to them, and so therefore they choose not to be judgmental, as we say, which I think is just an absolutely silly idea because you're being judged all the time.
Of course.
And
of course.
And so I'm not suggesting that we in any way, shape, or form conduct ourselves in some kind of theatrical, foolish, manipulative manner. I'm simply saying that be aware that you are being evaluated and, dare I say, judged all the time. And it's not just with your boss. It's with your coworkers. It's with clients. It's with your boyfriend's parents. You go to meet them. They're judging. They're sitting there going, I wonder what kind of guy this is, And so that's all. That's what I mean by that. Everything is a presentation. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Why is it so important for people as well as companies to understand the why or the core ideology behind what they do?
Well, I think that it's very, very difficult to connect with an audience unless you're coming from a place of truth, unless you have to know who you are and what you're doing and what your purpose is and what you believe in. And I think that factors into every single thing that we do. I mean, I think it factors into presentations as well. There's a wonderful book that I mention in my book. I mean, a very, very terrific book called Built to Last, which by Collins and Porras, which is now, I guess, probably 20 years old, if not older. And it's arguably...
Yeah, at least. Yeah,
it's arguably the best business book ever written. I mean, we can... Peter Drucker might object, but he's not around anymore either. So it's just a fantastic book. It's a wonderful book, and it's just about the fact that companies who figure out their core purpose and their core ideology, who they are, what they believe in, what values they hold, even if those values became unprofitable, but they would still hold those values. Companies that have figured that stuff out have outperformed the companies who haven't. So I think it's the same way with people. You approach a presentation, in fact, if not life, from a point of this is who I am, this is what I believe in, this is what I hold dear. And it doesn't mean that that's in the content, but it means that it's in your head and it's in your heart while you're talking.
Yeah, absolutely. And I ask that because I was influenced not only by Built to Last, but more recently, a few years ago, Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why, as well as a quote by Viktor Frankl in his book, Search for Meaning, that if a person knows their why, they can suffer through any how or what. And all of that came together in my mind to realize that the foundation of, at least for me, of understanding why I do what I do helped, if not absolutely remove the fear behind getting up in front of people or making presentations or selling ideas, if you will, is that there was a strong why behind it. So that's why I wanted to start out with that from your perspective, because I want to move into the fear. But in my mind, a lot of fear gets reduced if we understand that we have a purpose behind what we're doing, instead of it just being, I'm making some superfluous presentation about something that's not grounded in a purpose.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. That's very, very wise, Charles. I agree completely. And I would go so far as to say that you just mentioned superfluous presentations. An awful lot of them are just that. I see presentations in which I wonder, what was the point of this thing? Why did they waste? Really, why did they waste my time? Why are we here? And I think that's because the people who are giving the presentation don't know either. They don't really know. They're just reading the slides off the screen.
Absolutely. And I've been at fault in participating in some of those as well through the years. So
Oh yeah, we all make mistakes.
If you don't mind, I'll tell you about my first speech in front of a Toastmasters group. I got up, and it's called the Icebreaker, if you're familiar with Toastmasters.
A little bit.
I stood up and started to read my first speech. I was trying not to, but I was so nervous. I was shaking. I thought I was shaking the whole table. Mm. It seemed like an hour into it, and it was actually probably 30 seconds into my talk.
Right.
My left leg went numb, and I lost all feeling in it and couldn't put my weight on that leg because I was shaking so badly. And then the thought, and I'm continuing to read, and the next thought that hit my mind is, what happens if my right leg goes out? And so that fear, that noise and conversations going on in my head, I'm shaking the, what is it called? Not the podium, but I'm shaking everything, it seems like.
Yeah.
Managed to get through it somehow, sweat, if not blood, dripping down my face, I thought, took my seat. And the evaluator, who was sitting about 3 feet from me, she was looking at my nostrils. She was so close. Got up, and her first comment was, "I've never seen anybody so confident and calm in their first speech as you were." And several other folks came up later and talked about how apparently calm I was.
Wow.
And I say all that to your point because I literally laughed out loud as I read about. Again, your perspective is that most people can't tell the fear that we feel inside, that what we feel is not perceived on the outside.
Right.
You want to talk about that a little bit from what you've witnessed in your thousands of presentations?
Yeah. Well, I've watched so many people present. And I've seen so many presentations, obviously, and oftentimes, particularly in the workshops that I do around the different ad agencies and different organizations, and people will critique it. And much like the experience that you had at Toastmasters, people will say, "Well, boy, you seemed really confident," and the person almost inevitably says, "Really? I felt like my heart was going to burst out of my chest." And what I've learned is that the nerves that we're feeling don't transmit anywhere near the extent that we're feeling them, unless you're holding a piece of paper and it's shaking like crazy, and then that's a pretty good tell.
Right.
People don't see the nerves. They just don't see it. And I'm not sure exactly why that is, because I've gotten to the point where I can tell if people are nervous, but I just, I've done it so many times. It just makes a difference for me. But so, one of the things I say in the book, and I tell people all the time, is so forget about, get over yourself, forget about the nerves. We're all going to be nervous. I mean, the best presenters in the world get nervous before they stand up. They do. The trick is to use it for adrenaline. Get yourself pumped up. Let your blood run a little bit faster. Maybe your heart beats a little faster too. And then get on with it, and know that people are not seeing, the flop sweat that you're imagining rolling down your face. They're not. It's not, because it actually isn't there. Your mind is playing tricks on you.
I remember an interview with Johnny Carson not long after he had retired from the Tonight Show, and the interviewer was asking him about his calm and his demeanor, and Carson said that without exception, every single night as he stood at the curtain waiting for Ed McMahon to announce him, for him to, the curtains open up for him to walk through.
Right.
He said, without exception, he was so afraid that he had the temptation to turn around and run back to his dressing room. But that as soon as the curtain opened up and he stepped out, he knew from experience, of course, that he would do fine.
Right.
It was just that couple of minutes before he stepped out that scared him.
Yep.
And I thought, if that can apply to Johnny Carson,
right,
then it probably applies to all of us to some degree.
The greatest talk show host in history.
Yeah.
Every single time, you said without exception. That's a great story. I heard Mariano Rivera, who retired, I guess, a couple years ago now from the Yankees, arguably the greatest relief pitcher of all time. And relief pitchers come in when the game is on the line, when a lot of pressure.
Of course.
Typically the ninth inning, and you're trying to protect probably a one-run lead. Well, he had more saves than anybody in the history of baseball. But he told Dan Patrick that every single time when he got the call out in the bullpen to come on in, he was tremendously nervous. And he would jog in, and he was still nervous. But when he got to the mound and the umpire, the manager handed him the ball, he said it all went away because now I had the ball in my hand. I knew what I could do, and I just did it. It's a Johnny Carson story just told from a different perspective.
Yeah, great perspective. Great perspective.
Yeah.
So, is there a fear or any struggle, a fear that you have that allows you to develop a connection when a client or somebody you're working with says that you just don't understand, you don't get their fear? Is there anything that you can connect with them with that is in your own life?
I think that if I have a fear, it's of not delivering.
Huh.
I've been brought in for whatever reason, and I need to deliver. And I am going to deliver. I'm not going to let any kind of fear get in my way. But when I'm looking at the people and talking with them, I will always. I have to tailor my remarks to each person.
Of course.
Really good, really good coaches in the sports world. Again, to go back there, understand that you can't treat every player the same way. One person needs a pat on the back and the other one needs a kick in the butt, and you just need to find the way to, and the more you know about somebody, the easier it is to do that, of course. And I'm just thinking about several times in my career, I've been asked to work with a C-suite level executive, let's say, and those folks typically don't want to be a part of a group. They don't want to be a part of a 10 or 12 person workshop. They want it to be private.
Of course.
So I spend a lot of time. Yeah, I just spend a lot of time just talking with them and getting to know them and beginning to understand who they are and maybe a little bit about what drives them. As we discussed earlier. So I can then use some of that knowledge. But another important thing is that I'll always videotape the sessions, whether it's a group session or an individual one. And of course, it's not videotape anymore. I'm showing my age.
You.
They're all recorded. Yeah, they're recorded digitally, and I'll immediately do a playback, and almost invariably, there's that phrase again. The people look at it and go, "Wow, that's a lot better than I thought it was." I thought I was really terrible. I wasn't at all, was I? And I go, no, you weren't. And that's just the first time you've done this. Let's do it again, And you just, you get confidence. You begin to develop some confidence. Even though, Johnny Carson was nervous every night and Mariano Rivera was nervous every game, the best presenters I know are nervous all the time until it's their turn. And then they, as you said, I think so well, Carson knew that he could do it and he would come through every single time. So it does require reps. I think that's one of the one of the things that's good about Toastmasters, I've never been, but I have recommended it to lots of folks who want, extra work. And it's about, it's about reps. It's about doing it. QB1 gets all the reps in practice. QB2 doesn't get too many, and QB1 is QB1 for a reason, He's run the plays over and over and over again. And that you can't underestimate that. It's really important to get experience. So that's why I always recommend getting young people up and, well, see, so I know I'm rambling now, but we started school. I mean, our school at the VCU Brand Center is one of the very, very few places that I've ever heard of in which there is a full 3-hour class every single week for every single student in presentation.
Wow.
And yeah, and our kids come out of our 2-year program really ready to stand up in a room and sell their work. And it may not be even standing up. It may be across the desk from their creative director. It may be the really gifted ones demonstrate their talent, and they get that opportunity to go into a room with a client. Oh my God, And then they demonstrate that they can do it in front of a client, and those are the people that are on the fast track to success. Because every single place I go to is dying for people who can present their ideas. Every place I go to without parents. Absolutely, yeah.
Well, the creative world is full of great ideas.
Yeah. But the great ideas deserve to live,
Right.
That's one of the things that bugs me so much. I see people spending all of their time making their work and virtually no time figuring out how to sell their work. And it makes absolutely no sense to me at all. Because if you don't figure out how to sell it, it is not going to live. It's going to die. And with it, a little part of you, every single time.
Exactly.
So spend some time. I tell people in advertising that a presentation is really an ad for your ads.
Right.
Nowadays, obviously, we make a lot more than ads, but let's use the word ad for, a digital execution, an activation idea, any kind of thing at all. We'll call that an ad. And the presentation needs to be every bit as thoughtful, dare I say creative, as the work is.
Absolutely.
It really does. The way in which you present the idea is critical.
Go a little bit more into the presentation and the elements of presentation, because I think a lot of people, that's surprising to me. And I've seen the study before about those 3 elements in the breakdown and have known it, but it still surprises or shocks people to go, no, that can't be right. Talk a little bit about the visual, tone of voice, and the words we say.
Yeah, that comes from every research study I have ever looked at about the way in which people take information in from a presentation. And again, this could be meeting somebody for the first time in a restaurant. And it's not, you don't have a slideshow, you don't have a deck. You're just meeting somebody. But that's a presentation, as we said earlier. So the way in which people take information in are always the same in every research study that I've looked at. And those 3 elements are visual, tone of voice, and words, the actual words we say. As I said, I've looked at a lot of studies. The numbers, the percentages for those 3 categories come out very, very closely. So it tends to make me think they're probably accurate to the extent that research is accurate. And in this study that I'm citing, the visual component is 55%. So one way to think about that is that people are judging you. There's that J word again. Before you've even said a word. and people will say, well, you mean is visual my slides? And I said, yeah, if you have slides, but you might not have slides. So it's your clothing, it's your hairdo, it's your makeup, it's your it's the way you move around the room. It's what they see. The second element is the tone of voice. And in this study, that was 38%. So pretty darn important, obviously. The tone that we use when we're saying words can really change the definition of those words, you know. And if you're any good at math at all, that leaves 7% for the actual words we say. People will say to me, well, are you telling me that the content is they're only going to remember 7%? And I say, no. The whole thing is the content, what they see, the tone that you use, and the words you say combined. It's a holistic experience. And then they'll say, well, you're telling me that they're not going to remember most of what I say? And the answer to that is yes, they will not remember most of what you say. Sorry. Which is one reason, almost parenthetically here, I would argue for using colorful language, interesting words, turns of phrase, if you will. That's more likely to be remembered. And when I was discussing this with my friend Kagami-san in Japan, the first time I went over there, by the way, tried doing this kind of work in simultaneous translation for 8 hours a day.
That's exhausting.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have a little idea. It's like digging ditches in the Alabama sun in August. You know, that's what it's like. At any rate, Kagami-san said to me, I agree with you, Peter-san. They will not remember most of what we say, but they will remember what they think about what you said. And then I amended that to say, I'm thinking I was so clever, I said, yes, and they will remember how they felt about what we said. And then, of course, I happened upon the famous Maya Angelou quote about the idea that people will not remember what you say, but they will remember how you make them feel.
Absolutely.
And that's exactly true. It's exactly true. And one of the things, and I'm just going to jump ahead here without any prompting, Charles, if I may.
Please.
Because it's a perfect segue. It's a perfect segue to one of my key points and something I believe in wholeheartedly, which is that this entire exercise of presenting is about making an emotional connection. How do we make people feel? You know, what do they feel? We have to make them feel something. You know, this is seduction, not debate. That seems, counterintuitive to a lot of people.
Absolutely.
But it's about making an emotional connection. It's about the story you tell and how that story makes them feel.
I'll say, I think about the principles of good dating apply. You're not going to bore somebody with a lot of facts. Is what comes to mind for me.
We have to make the audience feel something. We have to connect with them on an emotional level. We make decisions emotionally. There's abundant data that proves that. We may justify these decisions all day long in a rational way, certainly, and we'll tell ourselves we're doing things because of this empirical proof, but we do it because of how we feel, how it makes us feel. And, I can go on and on with that for a long time, but that's how you reach an audience. And that's such an important breakthrough for people when they finally get there. We need to tell stories, the oldest form of communication known to man. When we were sitting around campfires, grunting at one another, we were telling stories. And that's how we learn. And the best stories are emotional. They make us feel a particular way. And that's what people are going to remember. That's what they're going to take away. That's what I drill into my clients when I'm helping with a new business presentation, or when I was doing the Boston 2024 pitch to the USOC. We've got all of this information. We've got all the empirical data, but how are we going to make them feel? And it's. I was doing a pitch for a client of mine a few years ago now for Cadillac automobiles. And we won, which was a big victory for our team. And when the decision maker was interviewed by Ad Age, they asked him, "Why did you choose these guys?" And he said, "Because they told the best story."
Wow.
He didn't say they had the best work. He didn't say they blew me away with their strategic thinking. He was honest enough, God bless him, to just say they told the best story. That's what presentations need to be, and that's why most presentations are not that. And that's why when you tell a story, you're going to win more than you lose.
Good point.
Tongue in cheek, I say it's a good idea to make the audience cry. If you make them cry, you win, because it's such a profound feeling that you gave them, that you shared with them, that they're overwhelmed by it, and you win. I have never been involved in a presentation on a team basis where we made somebody in the room cry and we did not win. We always win. Now, not everything is going to be the sort of thing that you can conjure up that sort of emotion. It may be that that it's humor. It may be that people just have such a good time listening to your team that they decide to go along with you and your ideas. Because there's another important thing to remember. They're hiring you. You know, I know you're a photographer and I guess videographer and some other things and all that, and I'm sure you have great images and you make beautiful pictures, but they're hiring Charles because they like Charles and they want to work with Charles. That's really why.
Well, it takes folks a long time to understand that, because in the creative world, I guess it's true in other arenas as well. But we think it's about our photographs or our ads or how we, again, have great ideas, or it could be about our products, without realizing that without the emotional connection, without the human connection, the products or the services we sell often are really commodities. There's several studies that most clients or most people think that something like 85% of ad agencies are all the same, and the same with photographers, or that the people who are doing creative work think, well, they all kind of do the same thing, don't they? So it really is that emotional connection. For us, part of the shift happened a number of years ago was to build connection through our discovery process by asking the kinds of questions that allowed us to understand who they were. Again, I go back to my analogy of dating. That's more important to ask questions than it is to give information, and to again, sit down or email or hopefully over the telephone at least with a client is just talk with them about their needs. Part of what you talk about is how often presenters will go in and do a lot of chest thumping with who they are and how great they are. And I just think if you make a connection based on your desire to actually serve the client based on what they need, not what you think they should get, that's the beginning of a good connection.
Yeah, agreed. And in fact, I agree with you as well. But I would go even further, and I tell this to my ad agency clients all the time. Even though the brief may be, give us your credentials, tell us about yourself, you have to make it about them.
Of course.
It's got to be about them.
Absolutely.
And even though we spend a lot of time figuring out answers to anticipated questions, to your earlier point, it is actually much more valuable to ask them questions and get them talking.
Right.
I'll go back to this dating thing that you insist on using, this analogy. When we first meet somebody, and let's say we're in a bar and we have a couple of drinks and we say, okay, it was a great meeting, and when we go home, good night, bye. If you did most of the talking, you think you had a great time.
Right.
You go, wow, what a great guy that Charles is. And if you had a transcript of the conversation, you would see that you spoke for 85% of the time, and Charles only spoke for 15. But what a great time I had. What a good guy he is. That's true. We all know that to be true.
Right.
Yet again, we change all those rules. We walk away from these things that we instinctively know when we think it's time to fire up the PowerPoint, and start reading to people. And it's hilarious, actually. It's like a Saturday Night Live routine sometimes.
Well, the classic book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, is probably one of the most important takeaways from that book was ask questions and let the other person talk. Uh-huh. And as you just said, when they go home, they go, wow, that was one of the most interesting people.
Yep. One of the things that I've been fortunate enough to do in my time is on occasion I have been asked to help advertisers find an agency partner. And typically, most of the vast majority of the time, I'm helping agencies win a piece of business. But on a couple of occasions, I've been on the opposite side of the table. And that's given me the opportunity to sit in the room and see the various competitors come in and strut their stuff, and then most of the buy, by the way, are all the same, and then sit in the room as they deliberate and come up with a decision. And most of the time, people can't even differentiate. They can't remember who showed them what. They just remember something about, I like that guy Charles Gupton's eyeglasses. I mean, it's silly stuff.
Absolutely.
So I'm being somewhat hyperbolic, but that is the way it works. They can't even remember who did what. And with regard to advertising, most presentations for our advertising agency listeners, they think is about the spec creative. Well, do great work, do the best work you possibly can, but that is not going to win you or lose you the account. It isn't.
Right.
It is not. I believe that firmly, because the vast majority of the time, the spec creative never runs. It never gets produced. They go, okay, we like this group of people. We can help them understand our company better and help them do better ads. That's what inevitably happens. This is hot off the presses, and I won't reveal the client, but I just found out last night about 9 o'clock that my most recent engagement with an agency pitching a huge piece of business was successful. And we were talking about it this morning, the CEO and I, and he said, I know we didn't have the best creative. I know we didn't, but we won. And if we can win when we don't even have the best creative, wow, we can really be something going forward. And I said, I think the reason we won, my dear friend, is that our team did a better job of letting the client see who we are, what we believe in, what we stand for, and frankly, how much fun it would be to work with us. That's why we won.
Absolutely.
And believe me, I was a creative director. I fight for good work. I fought for good work. I resigned accounts because I wanted to do great work. In the end, if you do all these other things well, then you can get to do the great work. Then you can get it produced.
My wife, Linda, was the director of communications at the Chamber of Commerce many years ago in Raleigh, and she had a great opportunity to sit in on an agency review for a particular account, for their account, but for a particular set of initiatives that they were undertaking. So she was able to see probably a half dozen agencies present, and she came home after that and said the most incredible thing out of it was that the agency that won in the end did no spec work. They showed nothing. They came in and just sat down on the edge of the table or sat down with the folks doing the review and said, we could come in here and try to show you what we would do, but we don't know who you are. What we need to do is understand who you are. We've asked some information. We've got some sense of who you are and what you want to do, but the spec work and the work we're going to do is not going to be used, just to your point. And they were just forthright and said, we really need to understand who you are, but let me show you a little bit about who we are, and talked about their values, what they did, and how they sold their thought process and their caring process, if you will, not their ideas. And without exception, every person in the room, when they left, said, those are the folks for us, because they're thinking about us, not about themselves.
That happened.
And
it happens all the time.
I mean, it was just a profound lesson for both of us to realize, just to your point, how important it is to go in and be authentic and, again, just be vulnerable and open about who you are and how you think. Huge lesson. I want to jump back to the presentation skills a little bit as well, because it seems like a lot of people go in those situations and not only they talk too much, they talk too fast, whether it's fear or whatever may be underlying that. But one of the important aspects that you bring out is the power and the importance of punctuation, if you will, verbal or nonverbal punctuation, pausing, the way that, again, tone of voice. Do you want to dig into a little bit about that, since the pause seems to be something most people completely miss.
It is, and I'll back up to what you said there in your lead up to the question. Most people in presentations speak way too fast, way too quickly. It's a particularly millennial trait, which you may have noticed, but
I have. Yeah.
not to pick on those good folks. We have to punctuate because it's very difficult. If you were writing a note, and heaven forbid, I mean, well, we live in the South, and we do write notes. We write thank you notes more than a lot of other folks do. But we're writing a letter. You're writing a document of some kind. I mean, I understand that rules of punctuation are out the window with a lot of digital communication. I understand that, but we all know what the tools are at our disposal, periods, commas, dashes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We also have a whole set of tools available to us when we're speaking. And the number one thing I believe, and when I ask people, what are some of these tools that we have, most of the time the first thing they come up with is pause, just as you mentioned. Although, interestingly enough, they are afraid to use it, because they seem to think if they go really fast, they'll get through this thing quicker and then sit down. And if they don't get hurt, they think it's a success. And just think about that for a second. If I go really fast, I'll get it over with and sit down. Well, if that's your motivation, why are we even there? It makes no sense. Take your time. Pause. And when we pause, what's the situation in the room? Silence. And I'll ask people, and how do you feel about silence? And they say, awkward. I feel awkward. So let's fill all the silence. Well, that's exactly the wrong thing to do. Silence is our friend. Make a point, give it a beat or two, let it sink in.
White space.
I've discovered that people... Yes, exactly. People tend to remember the last thing we say before we become silent. It's just how it works. That's a way that our brains let us know that what she just said was important, because she said it and then she paused for a moment or two and then she went on to her next point. So that's a big deal. But then we have to vary the pitch and the tone. We have to do all kinds of different things to keep people from getting exhausted. If you just hear the same tone over and over again, it's very boring, hence the term monotonous. You've got to vary it, change it, you can pick up the pace, and then you can slow down. You can use movement in the room, walk around the room, but use it for punctuation. Don't just wander around aimlessly. Facial expressions, all the different sorts of body language, all of these things are all a part of punctuation, and they all contribute to the level of connection that you will make with the audience. And that is, again, what we're trying to do. Connect with them, not speak at them, connect with them.
Yeah. The process of trying to get through it as opposed to making connections with people that they're going to remember versus, just trying to jump through it.
The thing to remember, again, this is counterintuitive for all the time we spend talking about how to be and how to behave and what to do and writing and reading books about it. It is not about us. It's only about the audience. If we're not connecting with the audience, if they're not getting our message, then it's a waste of time. So the things we do and the way in which we prepare are all designed for the effect we will have upon the audience.
Are there some people, in your view, who are being brave enough to take chances on matters that matter? Are there some folks that deserve to have a spotlight shown on them for work they're creating, in your view?
I would answer that in a different way, rather than talking about specific individuals, because that'll just get me in trouble. And there's so many different people who I do admire. I would answer it this way. For me, it's about people who are brave enough to defy convention and to create the exceptional. And that's what I want to do. I want to be a part of creating the exceptional, the very, very best. And I'll see students who are brave enough to do that at school, and I'll see clients who are brave enough to do it. You know, to walk away from convention, to defy it, as I say, and to do it without, okay, maybe I'm afraid, but I have the guts to do it. I'll tell you a quick story about that. A few years ago, I was working, actually only a couple of years ago now, I was working with a client on a pitch in which they were the incumbent on an enormous amount of money. This is one of the biggest accounts in America. And they told me that if they did not keep this portion of the account that they had, they would have to let 200 people go. Wow.
Oh,
that's pretty scary.
Yeah.
That's significant, because what are we doing? We're going to affect 1,000 lives, maybe, by extension. I mean, bottom line, by the way, is that that's what this stuff is really about. It's not about being cool and telling great stories. I mean, this is all about commerce. This is about people's lives. This is pretty serious stuff, even if I may treat it somewhat.
Well, it's personal.
Frivolously. Yeah, it is personal. Absolutely right. And this was an important piece of business, clearly critical, the biggest thing that this agency had ever had on the line. And when we were talking about what a win looks like, I said, well, a win to me is keeping all that and getting this other big chunk of money that's also in play. And they said, well, that'd be great, but what we really need to do is just keep what we've got. And I said, okay, I'll see you soon. So they began to go to work on a deck, because that was required. They had to have a deck, or so they thought. And when I got to the city where they reside about 5 days before the show, I said, let me see the deck. And I looked at the deck with them, and it had 300 slides.
Oh, my word.
300. Yeah. And it took 2 hours and 45 minutes to just read the slides.
Oh, wow.
The whole pitch was meant to be 3 hours long. I understood completely why they were doing what they did. What they were doing was, this is so incredibly important to us. We need to tell this client every single thing we can. Tell them everything we know about everything, And that's human nature. But I had built a relationship with these guys, and we had a level of trust. And so 5 days later, when they did the show, the whole show was 21 slides. And they did it in an hour and 17 minutes. And they made the people cry at the end, and they won. And they didn't just win the money that was on the table, they won that extra piece of business as well, and it turned into the biggest win in the history of that agency. And they did it by taking stuff out, not by putting things in. And I think that was really, really brave, because the smart thing to do, quote unquote, would be to do what they did, and just pack it with facts and figures. They took all that stuff out, and they just turned it into a powerful, emotional story, and it carried the day.
And 200 people kept their jobs. And
kept their jobs.
Probably more people got hired as a result.
That's exactly right. And the incumbent on that other piece of business actually had to fire some of their people. I derive no pleasure from that, but I do like the fact that it wasn't my guys who had to fire people.
Well, again, it's a competitive world, and you want to do the best you can for the people that you have been brought in
to help.
Yeah, do the best that they can do. Right.
Absolutely.
So that's commerce, and commerce is personal. So
yeah, it is.
Are there 3 books that you've read that have affected or impacted you the most, and what about them made a difference to you?
Well, I think one of them we've already mentioned, which is Built to Last by Collins and Porras. And the message there is just so fundamental. Have a core ideology, know what that is, identify that, identify what your values are, identify your goals, and that becomes your North Star. That becomes who you are. There's another book that I really like called The Art of Possibility.
Yes.
By Benjamin Zander and his wife Rosamund,
Great
although
book.
they are no longer married. It's an incredible book. It's not about it's a wonderful book. It's not about presenting, but it's about living and dealing with people and and doing the best work you can possibly do in helping them do their very best work. And I just finished a book that was fairly new to me, but a couple of years ago, a friend of mine told me about it, and I had forgotten about it. And it's by a professor of English at UVA named Mark Edmondson, and it's called "Why Teach?" with a question mark. And as a professor in a university, that's a question that pops up from time to time. And it's a really, really interesting series of essays about the role of a teacher and what we do and the effect that we can have on people's lives. So off the top of my head, that's 3 books.
Oh, that's great. The second book you mentioned, it is a quite a powerful book. Yeah, some great stories in there. Is there a powerful closing thought that you can leave from your years of experience that someone can use to transform their presentations, if not their lives?
I think that
big heavy weight.
Yeah. I think it's about standing up. Stand up on your own 2 feet. Recognize that, as you said earlier, this is personal. That this is a manifestation of who you are. And it's not some frivolous exercise. It's not some boring lecture. It's an opportunity for you to show people who you are, what you believe in, what your values are. And again, maybe not literally, but the way in which we do things says so much about who we are. And I guess it comes down to the power of your will. People go, well, how can you do that? That's so hard. How are you able to do that? I'm able to do it because I will myself to do it. How does anybody how do you make great photographs? Because you're determined that you will. How do you write a beautiful piece of music? Because you will. And because you worked at it. You've worked at it and worked at it and worked at it, and you've put in the work. And the fruit of all that labor is the ability to then get up and just do it.
The 10,000-hour principle of putting in your time and then continuing to build on it.
Yep. Malcolm sells 1 million books with like 1 idea per book, but I guess that was a pretty good idea. Actually, it was an observation. It wasn't even really his idea. The more you do things, if you're working at it and you're trying to improve all the time, it just makes sense that you're going to get better at it. But you've got to be open to learn. You've got to be open all the time to new ideas, new techniques. You've got to be. See, I'm my own harshest critic, and I think we all need to be that. That's good. That could be this. That could be that. Maybe this is a good closing story. A few years ago. And to the extent that this is self-congratulatory, I apologize, but it makes a point. A few years ago, I was asked to moderate a panel discussion in an evening with David Simon, the creator of The Wire, one of the best television shows of all time, and Richard Price, a brilliant novelist who wrote for several seasons of The Wire. And I was really flattered that this group here in Richmond asked me to do it. I didn't even know how they found me, as a matter of fact, but I jumped at the opportunity to do it, and it was in front of a full house. And I knew that it would be, so I worked at it. I did research. I studied about everything I could learn about these guys' lives, about their points of view about things. They're people whose work I really admired, and I was going to do this thing. I was going to be all in, as the cliche would have it, And it was a wonderful evening. At the end of it, we all went out to dinner together, and I brought my wife and some friends, and we hung around with these guys. And as we were saying our goodbyes and saying goodnight, I thanked them, profusely for doing what they had done. And they said to me, David Simon said to me, no, thank you. You were really, really good. And I said, well, thanks. Thank you very much. And he said, no, you don't understand. It didn't have to be that good. And he just turned around and he walked away.
Good story. Good story.
Let it go with that, Charles.
Good closing.
Yeah.
In addition to your website, Coughter.com, is there anywhere else you'd like folks to connect with the work you're doing?
Well, if they're interested, I think that the people really enjoy the book. The book's been out now for 4 years, and it's still selling well, and it's now in 6 languages, 5 of which I cannot read, but I urge people to buy a copy in all 6 languages. My wife will appreciate that. Yeah, and they look great on the bookshelf. But really, the way to access me is through the website. There's also a bunch of stuff on there that people might find helpful.
Yeah, you actually have quite an amazing site. You've got a lot of great short clips of you presenting very powerful ideas. Well worth the visit.
I've enjoyed doing this with you today. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to The Creator's Journey. If you enjoyed our theme music, the name of the song is You've Got a Home by Krista Wells. If you enjoyed the show and would like to see it fare well, I would appreciate having you go to iTunes and subscribe. While you're there, if you give us a favorable rating and review, it'll make a huge difference in helping a newcomer easily find it. If you want to email me with feedback or suggestions for potential guests, or if you want to connect with any of the guests or find links to the people and resources that were mentioned in each episode, you can do all of that at thecreatorsjourney.com. Till soon, my friend.